Hey everyone, this is Daniel Shahid, the co-founder of USMLE Forum of Pakistan, and this is our second episode of USMLE Step 1 question solving. So these questions are USMLE style question, and these are inspired from UWorld. So in this session, we are not gonna only tell you the information needed to solve the question, but we're also gonna tell you how to assess the question correctly in a correct manner in order to reach the correct answer. Okay, so let's move to our first question. So how I assess the question, I just read the last line of the question. Which of the following event most likely initiated this patient's current condition, and then I just skim the option, right? Okay, so I am skimming the options. Let's just give you the 10 second to skim the options. Okay, so you guys have skimmed the options, and then within 1 minute you have to read the rest of the stem. Okay, so you can just pause the video and read the stem with a calm mind, and then you can resume the video. Okay, so as you can see that in this patient, the chest pain is radiating towards the back, right? And you can also see that there is a difference in the blood pressure between right arm and the left arm. So this is a classic scenario for aortic dissection, right? So what happens in aortic dissection, the high blood pressure rips through the antima, uh, creating a false lumen within the media. This explains the sudden onset and radiation to the back. This tear usually start near the aortic arch or the ascending aorta, and if it spreads, it can mess with the perfusion to the limbs. That's why we see blood pressure difference. So the correct answer is tearing of intimal tear. So we can you can see that there are different types of aortic dissection, in which we have type A. In the type A, we got type 1 and type 2. So just remember for the rest of your life, it's a basic principles. If your basic principles are good, you can ace the exam, this exam easily. So as you can see that in the type A, ascending aorta is always involved. But in the type B, the descending aorta is always involved. Okay, uh, why now let's just look, let's just see that why other options are incorrect. So first of all, fatty streak in the intima, that's an early atherosclerosis, and it's not a sudden event, but this guy's chest pain is acute and severe. Okay, so option C, calcium in the media, sounds like Monckeberg medial calcific sclerosis, and this is an incidental finding on imaging in older adults. So it does not cause tearing tearing chest pain. So inflammation in the media could hint at as vasculitis like Takaso or giant cell arteritis, but they are chronic and present differently, often without this kind of acute tearing pain. And the last one is loss of perfusion to the vasovasarum. So it's an interesting choice, but again, it's linked with the tertiary syphilis and causes aortic aneurysm, not aortic dissection. Okay, so that's wrap up. Wraps up our first question. So now moving towards the next one. Okay, so again, I am reading the last line. This patient's underlying condition is most likely to be associated with which of the following additional features? Okay, so I just read the last line and I got to know what the question is demanding. Then I'm just skimming the options. Okay, I give you 10 seconds for that. Okay, so I guess you guys have skimmed the options by now. And now you can pause the video for 1 minute, and you can read the rest of the stem. Okay, so as you can see that first of all, this is a 7-year-old girl. Okay, and she got a short stature, which you can see that her height is at second percentile, and you can see that there is high blood pressure in her upper limbs but weak femoral pulses. So obviously it sounds like a coarctation of aorta. You can also see there is systolic murmur with a click, and you can note that her back curvature sounds like a scoliosis, and a leg pain during activity, which is suggesting some claudication. If you put all this together, uh, so it strongly suggests Turner syndrome, which is you can see here that in the Turner syndrome you got coarctation of aorta, you got streak ovaries and peripheral edema at birth, pigmented nevi, cubitus valgus, broad chest and widely spaced nipple, webbing of the neck, and short stature. Right, so this is the classic scenario of the Turner syndrome, right? So let's get back to our options. So the question is demanding that what additional features would be present. So let's see. Okay, so blue tinge is sclera. Oh god, this is osteogenesis imperfecta, which is a collagen defect with fragile bones, not a cardiac defect. Okay, brushfield spots, seen in Down syndrome. That's more about AV septal defect, not coarctation. Okay, peripheral nerve tumors or underdeveloped gonads. I guess underdeveloped gonads is the right answer. Let's okay. I am a bit suspicious on it. Let's see the D. Okay, peripheral nerve tumors. Okay, the peripheral nerve tumors they point to neurofibromatosis type 1, not related to the coarctation of aorta. And skin laxity. It's the EDS Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. Undeveloped thymus. No, it's DiGeorge syndrome. So I'm left with only one answer option, which is C, underdeveloped gonads. Obviously, I know that it's that in the Turner syndrome there is underdevelopment of gonads. But what I'm trying to show you guys that there is another method of solving of question solving. Is which is deletion method. So I'm just giving you a sample of deletion method, that how we use the deletion method, in which we eliminate the wrong ones, and finally we cut out ourselves to one option or two options. Okay, so Turner syndrome is 45XO. In the Turner syndrome, which is highly associated with coarctation of aorta, and other feature include a short stretcher, web neck, streak ovaries, and primary amenorrhea. Okay, so that's it about this question. But let me tell you one thing: a clinical pearl. Whenever you see a coarctation of aorta in a short stature girl, always think of a Turner syndrome and look for gonadal dysgenesis. Okay, this is the coarctation of aorta, right? You can see that how the proximal part, sorry, of the aorta is narrowed, and it leads to a discrepancy in the blood between the upper limb and the lower limb. This was the neurofibromatosis type 1, and you can see that the findings of neurofibromatosis type 1 are totally different. Down the finding of DS are totally different. The breast field spots the mentioned here, right? So this wraps up our second question. Now we're gonna move towards the our third question. Okay, so again, I'm gonna read the last line. The drug most likely causing these symptoms also associated with which of the following actions. Okay, now I'm gonna skim the options. I give you 10 seconds for that. Okay, now you can pause the video, and you can take your time to read out the to read out the rest of the stem. Okay, so you can see that this guy had an MI, and after MI, he was given some appropriate post-procedural medication. You must know that what are the basics post-procedural post-MI medication, which are obviously blood thinners like aspirin and platelet inhibitors like clopidogrel and the lipid-lowering agents like statins and also yeah, these are the common drugs which are given post MI. So right now, another thing which you can appreciate in this question, that the patient is having muscle soreness and cramps, and upon the laboratory testing you can see that there is elevated creatinine kinase level. Boom. So that suggests that there is damage to the muscles. So now you will think that since the pain started after starting the medication, and also you can see that there is elevation of creatine kinase level, so this strongly suggests that there is damage to the muscles. Right now you will think, okay, which post procedural medication given in MI will causes muscle damage. Obviously it's a statin, right? So now you have to think, okay, if it is statin, so now you have to think how statin works. Okay. So statin works by inhibiting HMG-CoA reductase, we all know, and this reduces the cholesterol synthesis in the liver, and the liver compensate by increasing LDL receptor expression and recycling, pulling more LDL out of the circulation. That's why statins lower LDL so effectively. So in short word, statins enhance the recycling of LDL receptor in the liver cell, and that's our answer. The answer D. Okay, why not others? First of all, let's look the option A. So, reduction in prostaglandin production, obviously that's a different thing, and that's the NSAID territory. Okay, increase bradykinin, no man, that's how the ACE inhibitor works. Okay, reduce potassium movement into the cell. That's the insulin deficiency or beta blocker effect. You know that beta blocker are also given in the post MI period. Okay, so greater resorption of calcium, no man, that the thiazide diuretic effect, and it's totally unrelated, totally unrelated. And suppression of hepatic gluconeogenesis, that's a mechanism of action of metformin, not the statin. Okay, so moving over towards our next question. Okay, that's a different style question in which you have okay. So in during my step 1 days, when I get any question this style, so I initially focus on the laboratory findings. Right. First of all, I would go to the last line again, same manner, best account for these finding, and then I'm gonna skim the options. Then after the skimming options, I'll go towards the labs. Before reading the explanation, I'll go towards the lab, and labs will give me the idea of what's going on in this patient and how to think, how to orientate, how to orient my thinking while reading the explanation. Sorry, while reading the rest of the stem. Okay, so now you can see again. I just give you 10 seconds to skim the options. Okay, so now you can pause the question, and then you can read the rest of the stem. So you can see that a huge hint given in this question is that the patient is non-compliant to his medication, right? It's a very huge hint given in this question that the patient is non-compliant to his medication. Now after if you focus on the labs of this patient, you will see that the baseline blood pressure when he was admitted, or when he reached your office. So the blood pressure was 165/95, and the plasma and activity was 2.5, right, the lower normal. After 3 weeks of therapy, you see that his blood pressure is remain unchanged, and not a significant difference, and the plasma activity is not significantly different. So, what should have happened if he was actually taking the meds? We know very well that hydrochlorothiazides they do the volume depletion and they increase the renin. But here, the renin is not increased, right? This patient is on thiazide and valsartan, right? So, thiazide diuretics increases the renin activity. Why? Because they cause volume depletion. And if you see the valsartan, so valsartan is an angiotensin 2 receptor blocker, right? It's an ARB. So ARBs again, when if you are using the ARBs, there is loss of negative feedback that also increase the renin. So the renin activity should be raised. Both medications should elevate the renin like crazy, but here there is no change. So the correct answer is in this, obviously failure to adhere to the prescribed medication or treatment, which is the option B, right? So again, this is the only choice you can see which explain both findings. No blood pressure improvement, no renin elevation, right? Because if he is not taking the medication. Okay. Now, so why not the other options? The because the let's talk about the option A, low sodium diet. Man, low sodium diet would make the renin go up, not stay the same, right? Obviously, when the sodium is low, this somehow activates your renin angiotensin system. Okay, so the renin activity would have been raised. Okay, obstructive sleep apnea, increased sympathetic tone, and renin. Again, yeah, renin will would rise, not remain unchanged in obstructive sleep apnea, which is the option C, which is the wrong option too. Okay, primary hyperaldosteronism. Okay, this option might be confusing, but again, my friends, primary hyperaldosteronism raises the aldosterone, which ultimately reduces the renin by a negative feedback mechanism. And this guy has a normal renin, which doesn't fit. Renal artery stenosis reduce renal perfusion and increase renin. So again, mm, uh, it's not the correct choice. And let me tell you something about renal artery stenosis for your step one. Remember, for the rest of your life or for the time period in which you are about to give your step one exam, that renal artery stenosis is the case in which there is no significant improvement after prescribing the blood pressure medication, right? So that's why the plasminogen activity is also given here. That differentiates between the option B and option E, right? Because if the patient is using the medication correctly, then obviously the renin activity would have been changed. But since his renin activity is unchanged, so that's why the answer is B. Okay, so I can give you a clinical jam here. If BP stays high and renin does not change after starting renin angiotensin system blockers plus diuretics, always suspect non-adherence. It's more common than you think. Honestly, it's more common than you think. Okay, so moving towards the next and the last question, uh, which is yeah. So, which of the following is most likely explanation for his current neurologic deterioration? Reading the last line. Now, just skim the options. I give you 10 seconds. Okay. Okay. So now I give you a minute in which you have to read the stem. You can pause the video. Okay, so first of all, I'm gonna give you an early recap of the case. This is an early diabetic male. Okay, and you can see the stemi in lateral leads, lead 1, AVL, B5, B6. These are lateral leads, which suggest left um, anterior descending, left anterior descending artery or circumflex artery uh, mm, blockage. Okay, so no PCI available, no percutaneous intervention was available. Obviously, if there is no percutaneous intervention available, or if the patient does not fit the criteria, because in order to undergo percutaneous intervention, the patient must come to the hospital within 90 minutes. But if the patient is not meeting the criteria, or if the hospital was not having that intervention, so we switch the patient to the fibrinolytic therapy. Okay, so hours later, the patient is now comatose and has asymmetric peoples and irregular breathing. So what happened, my friends? Uh, Obviously, the answer is D. And you know that fibrinolytics like LT plays, fibrinolytics LT plays work by converting plasminogen to plasmin that dissolve fibrin clots, but they carry a high risk of intracerebral hemorrhage, especially in the elderly patients, those with hypertension, diabetes, or vascular disease. And you can see that this guy has carotid stenosis, and timing, it starts after hours after treatment, the perfect window for bleeding to develop. So the symptoms are asymmetric people. Why? Due to uncal herniation from expanding hematoma. I'll let me show you the picture. So you can see that the hematoma is expanding, and there is uncal herniation. This is the you can see it's written here. And uncal herniation leads to asymmetric people. Is irregular breathing, again due to the herniation of the brain. The medulla will be involved, brainstem will be involved, and which leads to irregular breathing. And the patient is now comatose because increased ICP, or again brain herniation. So now why not the other options? Option A, this would cause ischemic stroke, not the hemorrhagic stroke, and not sudden. Obviously, in the ischemic stroke, there is no sudden coma or people asymmetry like here. But keep in mind, for the rest of your life, this is very important for our clinical skills, that ischemic stroke and hemorrhagic stroke differ on the basis of the symptom onset. How I used to remember this, that in a hemorrhagic stroke, symptom worsens literally by seconds, by minutes. Symptom worsens, they're not gonna improve as compared to ischemic embolic stroke or ischemic stroke. The symptoms not worsen in such a rapid manner, they are stabilized, right? They would cause a neurologic deficit to a specific organ or to a specific point, and they won't increase, right? But in the hemorrhagic stroke, the symptom will worsen. Okay. As B, ascending aortic dissection, man, obviously that's a totally different case. It caused the pain radiating to the chest and radiating to the back, and possible. Uh, it's a totally different thing, man. It doesn't fit here, right? Okay. You can see the septal wall ruptures, the option C. It can happen post MI. Yes, it can happen post MI, but it would cause cardiogenic shock, holosystolic murmur, and congestive heart failure signs, but not coma. Okay, and the last one is no, it's E. So myocardial reperfusion injury, that would cause arrhythmia, my friend, but by free radical damage, but not neurologic sign or coma. And pulmonary embolism, it causes sudden dyspnea, hypertension, tachycardia, not coma, not coma, or alternate mental status or anything like that. So the clinical pearl is fibrinolytics save lives, but bleeding is the price. This is how I used to remember, and the brain is the most vulnerable here. Always weight the risk, especially in elderly or those with vascular diseases. Okay, so if a post-STEMI patient suddenly crashes neurologically, think bleeding in the brain, recognize if early, you have just saved a question and also a life. And this wrap up our session. See you in the next. Thanks.